Welcome back to The Sensitivity Doctor. Today, I got to have Greg Singleton, another one of my fantastic fellow TEDx Raleigh talkers here on the podcast. Greg is a strategist for generational communication. He is a coach, a trainer, and a phenomenal speaker. And we had a really great conversation where I think you'll get to see us having a little bit of that back and forth conversation about why are we struggling with discourse? Why are we struggling with disagreeing? Why can't we all just get along? He gives you some really specific tricks and tips and things you can say, and also things to watch out for how can you start to relate to someone else when you don't necessarily see eye to eye. I really love also the honesty within this conversation where we talk about some of the things that we tend to disagree with the most, like politics. So let's dive right in and see what does Greg say about how we can all get along. So I hope you enjoy the episode and gain just a couple ideas of how you can start to get along with those difficult people in your life who maybe you don't see eye to eye with. Yeah, so I'm excited to dig in with you, Greg, because something that I love about your talk and just kind of your whole approach is that I think you managed to cut straight through the BS and go right to the heart of a matter, but without being offensive and without pushing people away. And I think that is really, truly the heart of the whole entire conversation that we wanted to have today of like, what is happening? Why are we struggling so much? I mean, we'll probably talk about our country, but really just as people, why are we struggling to have hard conversations? Why has discourse become so difficult? And in your opinion, with your expertise and what you are passionate about, what do you think we should do about it?
Yeah, for the most part, a lot of the conversations that people are having now is, I think a lot of it is rooted in ego. And when you start from any conversation from a place of ego, you really don't open up any lines of communication. You start with the demand that I am right. What I know is the only thing that can be presented in this conversation.
Right.
And once you start from that place, you're already shutting down lines of communication. And the moment you shut that down, you can't connect with anyone. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter what generation it is. It doesn't matter, what they believe or what they think they know.
Right.
The minute you take the stance that this is it, you're shut it down. And then from there, you can't connect with anybody. And the only way to ever influence or at least have an open dialogue or a conversation about something is to connect with someone. And if you can't open up the lines of communication because your ego is driving it, you're never going to be able to connect with that other person. Rather than just saying, listen, I know that this is what's going to happen. Don't. Just set aside your ego before you get into conversations, before you get into any sort of belief system or knowledge base, whatever that may be. You have to be able to understand, okay, I need to remove my ego. What can I learn from this? And once you start to say, that's really great. I see what you're saying, or I hear what you're trying to accomplish from a different perspective. This is where I think the conversation might be able to go, but definitely let me know what you're feeling about it, because from the knowledge base that I know and what I've been exposed to and the way that I have seen things, this is the perspective that I'm coming at it with. Where do you think we can find common ground with not everything, but one or two things?
Right.
And once you can start there, you'll be able to find a connection, and that immediately removes an ego.
Right. So you kind of highlighted what our ultimate goal is. Like, okay, so the goal is that we can have discourse, we can have conversations, we can meet each other maybe from different vantage points without our ego showing up first. That's where we want to like get to.
Yes.
Why do you think we're struggling to get there?
Depending on the situation that you're in and depending on the age group of who you're chatting with, I think a lot of the conversations that we're having, the gaps are becoming wider and wider for a reason. And I truly believe that, as you know, when you're chatting with someone, you're usually having one of three conversations. You're either having the emotional, the social, or the practical side of the conversation. And I don't think a lot of people are taking the time to listen to what another person is saying, recognizing that, okay, so what you're saying to me right now seems a little very emotionally driven. And if it is emotionally driven, I need to meet that with an emotional repertoire of, great, this is understanding. I see where you're coming from. I know how you can feel that way. Or if you decide to have a social conversation, keep it in the social bucket. And if you are having a practical, keep it practical. The moment you start to blur those lines between all of those three different conversations, people get lost in what they're chatting about. You started in one place and then you ended up in a completely different, because you started in an emotional, you combated it with a practical, and now you've flipped the conversation and you don't know where you're going anymore. So I really think that emotional intelligence is going to lead a lot of the conversations moving forward, and how you decide to decipher which emotional, social, or practical conversation you're having with a group of people or an individual, that will lead you in a direction that should bridge most of the gaps that you're having in a lot of your conversations.
Okay, so let's take something that people struggle a lot with, which is having a political conversation.
Sure.
How would you, and I love that you're smiling because you and I have had some even private conversations on our impressions of this. How would you as a person be able to know if you're having an emotional political conversation, a practical political conversation, or a social? If you could
Sure.
give me 3 examples, but it's all related to politics because let's be honest, that's like one of the most difficult things to talk about.
It is. It can incite a lot of people very quickly, and it can be divisive. But if you really take the time to sit and figure out what it is that you're talking about, you can bridge a lot of those gaps. Now, if you're having a social conversation, you can talk about, the social aspects of what's happening in society. And once you start to have that type of conversation within, a group or an individual of people, you have to be able to keep that social. What is the social impact? What are the positives and what are the negatives of the social side of what's really going to happen with this? And you can pick any side of the argument, whether left or right. That doesn't matter. Both still believe that it is social. But
Could
the
I ask you a
moment you,
quick question about that?
yeah, sure.
How do you know? Because if you talk about something that's like social justice or like a socially driven topic, it could still get emotional. So do you know for our
Yes.
listeners who are like, okay, which bucket am I in? I think I'm almost asking for like literal symptoms or literal
Okay.
examples of, okay, good. This is what it looks like to be in a social conversation, emotional conversation, looks
Sure.
or feels like, so someone can really know the difference.
Absolutely. To choose a quick specific example, I'll just choose groceries. It's
Go for it.
it's a topic right now for that. If you're going to walk in and you're going to start to have a conversation about groceries, you can have a social conversation, whether you're left or right, it doesn't make a difference. You can have a social conversation and saying, wow, I mean, did you go? I went to the grocery store the other day and I was going to make a pot roast. Holy cow, did you see the price of what that is right now? My God, when did it go up that high? That's crazy.
Yeah.
There's no political discourse on either side of that. That's a
Right. You're
social
not giving your
conversation.
opinion. You're just observing
Anything.
what's in the moment. Okay.
That's just a social conversation you can have with someone. And then if you start to move that to them saying, I know, how are we going to get these prices down? Like, this is crazy. Like, I don't understand how we're even going to move these prices to get them back to where they used to be able to be. Now you've switched from a social conversation into a practical conversation. And now
Okay.
you're getting into, okay, so the practical side to be able to get these groceries down would be, we really need to chat with, farmers to be able to figure out what their prices are, and then figuring out how we can, get better rates and being able to understand what the practical side of getting these prices down to a place that society can accept.
Right.
And that's when you've moved into a practical side. So now you've changed the conversation from social, hey, how are you? Oh my God, I can't believe it's so expensive, to, all right, this is how I think we can get them down. And then the moment
Yeah.
that you switch from that and you go into the emotional side, that's when you can trigger, no, absolutely not. That is not the way I believe you get prices down. That's not the way I believe you should be able to increase what we're doing right now. Now you've moved into the emotional side because you're triggering in them a belief system. And that belief system is what can trigger the emotional side. So a simple conversation, even about groceries, can go from social to practical to emotional, but you need to be able to figure out the reactions that you're having from the person. And once you can figure that out and start to understand, emotional is driven by, your belief system, or, what you know, or the things that you've been raised with, or, the family history of everything that you've had included inside your world. Those are very different than practicals. And once you start to trigger on all three, that's when conversations get lost. And that's where I believe that a lot of us start to become, confrontational rather than, collaborative.
I like this. And actually, for anyone not watching us and just listening, I feel like they could probably hear the change in your tone. But a big part of co-regulating with another human being is facial expression and tone. But watching your face, when you were social about the groceries, there was a lightness about you. Your head was moving a lot. Your eyes were not, your brow was not furrowed. And there was even a slight smile, even though you were talking about something kind of stressful.
Yeah.
And then when you moved into more of the practical, your brow started to furrow. Look, you're almost doing it as I'm saying it, but your smile certainly went away, and there wasn't this lightness about you, but it was almost more of like a forward motion of like, okay, what are we going to do? And then as you got into the emotional, everything just got so much more like kind of intense. And there was just, I could see the shift even as you were acting out the different stages. So I'm just pointing that out. That's really interesting that might be something if you're, say, with the family or with friends or with a coworker, and you're trying to figure out which bucket are we in, sometimes you can just watch the person's nonverbals too.
Yeah, because no matter what you're choosing to engage in with, obviously connection and communication happens with or without speech. And
True.
you have to be able to recognize that you can admit an emotion and you can admit a stance very quickly and easily just by changing how you choose to do the physical movements or how you choose to lean in and engage with someone. And if you are doing that, then you start to recognize that, yeah, we're having a social conversation. We could be able to easily do this. Oh my God, I know, that's so great. And then
Yeah.
if you start to you disconnect and you
Right.
start to say, I don't agree with that, you're going to see them start to pull back, and then they're going to start to create distance. Sometimes they may tell you with their face, they may tell you with their hands, they may tell you certain aspects of your conversation. And now you need to figure out, oh, okay, I just hit a nerve, but I hit an emotional nerve. I didn't hit a practical nerve. Okay, I can fix that. And that will help you just bridge a lot of the communication gaps that I believe, whether in political or generational or individual, all of those aspects I do believe are happening.
And it does seem like it's a two-way street for sure. I'm thinking even as a therapist sometimes, like let's say I've had a long day and I'm like on session 7 and I'm tired and my back hurts usually by that point, and crossing my arms feels really good on my shoulders. Like it kind of relieves the pressure of the back of my shoulders. And so I found myself yesterday in a session with a client who was being very vulnerable and expressing a lot that they had not expressed in session yet. And I had enough emotional awareness because I'm their therapist
Obviously.
to think for a moment, oh, I wonder if me crossing my arms like this, even though I'm just doing it because my shoulder hurts, is making them feel like I'm not open to what they're saying. So I like consciously unfolded my arms and, kind of opened my body up. So I feel like there's that internal awareness that we need at the same time as what's going on for the other person. The interesting thing, though, is that as a highly sensitive person, which is what a lot of the folks that listen to this podcast are, they've kind of got that in the bag. They're almost too aware of how other people are feeling. And it seems to me, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, highly sensitive people might try to stay in the social practical, but be more easily pulled into the emotional.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
Thoughts?
And that's absolutely one of the key components of being highly sensitive is when you're really in that sensitive state, you're trying to connect with another individual. And highly sensitive people really love the ability to connect with someone. And a lot of them will give an immense amount of who they are and how they can help
Yep.
that other person or that situation. So they will emotionally overextend themselves to be able to please the individuals that are sitting across from them or just a person. And if they don't get reciprocal back with an emotional response of, my God, thank you. That meant so much to me. I appreciate you being able to do that. That meant everything to me. That will give the validation back to the highly sensitive person in the emotional state. If you reply back with the, okay, I appreciate it.
I'm
And you don't,
relating. I don't necessarily need the first reaction. I'm
yeah,
okay with a little bit more neutral, but the
yeah,
second reaction you gave, I'm like, oh God, the one word answers sometimes. It's like, give me more.
they are. They're such a short connotation of a
Yeah.
thank you and
Mm.
how people react. But you have to be able to understand the individual that you're chatting with. And if they are overly extending themselves emotionally, you do need to respond with an appropriate emotion. Now, that's going to vary, depending on the individual and depending on the situation. That doesn't mean that the whole conversation needs to stay emotional. It just means you do need to respond politely and respectfully in an emotional state. And then you can move the conversation toward the practical or the social side. And how you be able to do that is going to vary differently. But the emotional side for a highly sensitive person will get you further along with the connection between the two of them than it will from starting in a practical or a social side.
I wonder with the emotional if there are kind of two avenues within this though, because I think of when we are,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of like the polyvagal approach when we're in a ventral vagal versus dorsal. So when we're shut down versus when we are in connection, when we're in
Mm-hmm.
defense versus when we're in connection. And both of those are technically emotion states in a way of the body. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious, let's say you're in a conversation, someone's listening and they're like, okay, I get you, Greg. You're saying when my histrionic, over the top mother is emotional, I need to be emotional with her. And it's like, okay, well,
Uh,
maybe, maybe not. Maybe there's something to be said for, and I'll ask you this specifically.
sure.
If you feel like the emotions are not healthy that you're receiving, what do you do? Like, what if you don't want to get into the emotional state with that person? How do you handle that?
That's going to be, again, both sides have to have an emotion when you're entering into it. So if the other side is becoming very emotional and very triggered in that, you have to be able to accept the fact that responsibility and accountability for the conversation that you're having. And that can look something quickly and easily by saying, okay, I understand that I may have hit a nerve right there. And, I'm really sorry. That was not my intent to bring us to this level of the conversation. So I apologize that that's not really where I wanted this to go. But I can see that I have agitated you in a way, shape, or form. And from here on out, just let me know if I'm getting to a point that's going to agitate you a little too much or if we need to change the direction of the conversation. But for right now, I do apologize for where I stood. And I would love to be able to get back on track to be able to figure out how we can move forward with the topic that we were chatting about, just to make sure that when we both leave, we both understand where we're coming from and that we have the ability to say, okay, so I can take points A and B away, you can take points C and B away, and we can somehow figure out how to move forward. But if you don't meet that, and if they get triggered and they're in a highly emotional state, and you reply back with a highly elevated state of, say, anger or annoyance, your fight or flight's going to kick in, and you're obviously not running, so you're going to fight. And if you're going to
Right.
fight, you're going to then come back to the same exact stance that we began with, which was ego. And because your anger is going to kick in and say, I know I'm right. I don't care what you think. I don't care what the state that you're in. Even though you're mad right now, that doesn't matter to me because I know I'm right. And we're right back to the same stance of ego.
How
And
would
that's
you
when you need to be able to move it.
how would you take the very highly emotionally intelligent way that you just handled the mock session or the mock situation and bridge that down for someone who maybe doesn't feel as verbal? Like
Sure.
they can't say as much as you just did. Like they might have just heard you and thought, "Whoa, I don't know how I'm going to say all that." What would be a simple statement someone could give?
Sure. Simple, quick, easy way to say that is I'm really sorry that I might have offended you right there. That's it.
Okay.
And
Simple.
that is a simple, quick, easy way to recognize that you've elevated someone else's emotional state and take responsibility and accountability for what you're saying. Now, that doesn't mean you have to just throw everything else out and just say, oh, okay, I'll only bow down to what you say. It just
Yeah.
means you do have to recognize what has happened, and a quick, easy way to say that. You don't have to get verbal as I did. You can just say, I'm really sorry that I offended you right there.
And I would go a step further too. I wonder what you think if maybe someone doesn't feel like they want to necessarily say, I'm sorry, because maybe they were not the
Mm-hmm.
reason that the argument started to go sideways. I wonder how you feel about someone just saying, I recognize that I might have
Sure.
offended you. Would that work too, you think, if it was said in like a caring way?
Correct. And that can work very well. One of the reasons that the apology of I'm sorry is because when you take accountability for say I'm sorry, that means you have to take accountability for your actions. And a lot of people resonate with the words I am sorry. And that means that you have to take accountability. When you say that I have recognized, that does take accountability, but it doesn't actually create the whole connection between what normal responses of humans are in society, which are, I'm sorry, I didn't mean
Yeah.
that. And, but when you keep burying down into an apology, there's a whole different avenue we could go with that. But just the words of I'm sorry do equate to the regular human being of I take responsibility for what I said. But I recognize it's the same exact statement. And if you are speaking to someone who's a little bit more educated in that manner of emotional intelligence, they may recognize that as equivalent to I'm sorry for sure.
Yeah. Now, I would say also the flip side of this, if the person you're talking to is in the emotion state
Mm-hmm.
and they are toxic or they are abusive or they are truly the one who had, started the, I don't know, the negativity becoming
Mm-hmm.
so heightened. I don't
Yes.
necessarily feel like anyone listening should have to be this big of a person. I don't know. I mean, I feel
Agree.
like, so what are your thoughts on that?
Agree wholeheartedly because there are
Okay,
different
good.
degrees to being able to say an apology.
Okay.
If you are in a situation with someone and your conversation is becoming confrontational quickly, and you are getting pressed that it is all your fault and you did this and you're the
Like
one
they're
to blame,
gaslighting you
and
or something.
correct, and they're gaslighting you to make you believe that you did that, there's a very very easy way for you to be able to get out of that conversation, because these conversations, you don't have to steep yourself in them. You can still connect with an individual and you can still remove yourself from the situation. And a simple way for people being very agitated and blaming you for everything is simply saying, I understand that we may have reached a point of the argument that we're not going to be able to agree on the points moving forward. And you know what? That's okay. And your stance, I'm not going to be able to change that for you. And we both have to take accountability for what we did. So, from my standpoint, right now, I'm going to leave this conversation until we both are able to take a breath or revisit it at a different time. But for right now, this isn't healthy for me. And I don't think it's healthy for either one of us. So, I think we should probably take a break.
I very much agree. And kind of like we were giving the two versions before, like what could you say if you're talking to an emotionally mature person?
Yeah.
I feel like what you just said is something you could say to someone that you have a good, safe, secure relationship with.
Yeah.
I think the first, literally just the full first sentence you said is kind of all you have to say or really would want to say to someone who is potentially abusive is,
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember exactly how you said it. I don't know if you recall, but it was something along the lines of, I can see that we're not at a good place.
Yes.
Do you remember exactly what you said at the very beginning?
I can see that
Roughly.
we've raised to points where we've gotten to a point where neither one of us are going to be able to see eye to eye. And it's not productive for either one of us anymore.
Perfect. Period. Explanation point, hashtag, whatever it is. That to me feels like if you're encountering a power struggle, a potential like abusive situation,
Mm-hmm.
that's all. Like you don't have to say anything beyond that. But
Agreed.
I love the extent of you giving two examples. You're almost giving the example of what can you say if you're in a relationship or dialogue with someone who is willing to listen to you versus someone who's not willing to listen to you.
Yeah, because communication and connection are very different in between individuals and groups of people. And this is where the emotional side and the intelligence of who you're dealing with and what you're sitting in becomes extremely valuable to the way that you choose to connect and create a bond between, whether that's a group of people or an individual, because they're all very, very different. As you know,
Mm,
every single one of us has had different lives. We've had different upbringings. We've had different social aspects, different economic aspects, different belief systems, religious, political, whatever that may be. And every single opportunity to connect or converse with someone, you have to be able to recognize what type of conversation it is, and then be aware enough on whether you need to double down on it or back out of it.
yeah. And it's interesting because when I think about the way that you see communication, how you separate it from social, practical, emotional, it makes me think of in couples counseling under like the Gottman method. He has
Mm-hmm.
this idea of when a couple hits a conflict and they constantly hit, it could be anything, it could be a chronic issue, it could be an acute issue, that they will hit a point where they're getting nowhere and then they have to figure out as a couple what is their typical repair method. And repair methods can look like anything from sticking your tongue out at each other, tickling each other, watching a movie, going for a walk, taking a break. And what I'm thinking about now is what he calls a repair method is kind of what you call shifting from emotional back to practical or social. Like it almost feels like the repair method is we've gotten to the emotional state, we need to shift back to social state so we can relate again.
Yeah. And that's one of the regulations that you can have in a conversation. And how you choose to go about it is your own method. You have to do what works for you. You can only take the guidance from what we are saying in this conversation as just, scaffolding for you to build what it is that you need. But every which way that you choose to communicate, you do have to be able to figure out a way to connect with the other person. Once you do that, you're going to be able to figure out where the common ground is. That doesn't mean you have to agree all of the time. That will never,
No,
ever happen. But you do have to be able to find common ground. And whether that's,
right.
at a 30,000-foot view or whether that's at a 3-foot view, you have to be able to find it. And that will be up to you to be able to bridge those communication gaps. Because if the other person isn't able to do it and they can't lead you in the direction that needs to be done, you do have to take accountability for being able to do it.
It's funny because when you say like being able to see the other person's point of view, it makes me think about so many of the conflicts that we have often are in relation to just not knowing the other person or seeing them as a whole person
Mm-hmm.
outside of whatever the conflict is. And way back when I randomly was a guidance counselor for a couple of years, it's a whole story. And another time, another place, I'll go into it. But one of the things that I would do, I was in an elementary school, and one of the things that I would
Mm.
do when I had like this little mailbox where I would let the kids put their notes if they were in trouble or they wanted to talk or something like that. But sometimes the kids would get sent to me by their teacher if they were having conflict. And the first thing I would do before asking them what happened, I would not ask them what happened. I would have them play the 20 questions game.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I would have them learn little things about each other first. Do you know so and so? No, I don't really hang out with so and so. Okay, well, what's so and so's favorite color? I don't know. Well, let's ask. Let's see. And this was elementary age, so this was age appropriate for them. So we
Yeah.
would first do a little bit of insight building about the other person. And then as I saw their nervous system soften a little, hopefully, it worked almost every time. I would then say,
Yeah.
okay, so let's really think back of what was going on. What happened in class? And almost every time, the story would change from what the teacher had originally sent them down for to what they would end up telling me after they got to relate to each other a little bit.
Yeah.
It was really
That's
cool.
it's incredible once you can start to recognize that your initial response to whatever it may be, the experience or the environment, will also trigger everything that you've ever been known and has built into your subconscious to figure out how to cope with what's there in front of you. So most every single one of us do the best we can with what we have. And then until we're educated, perfectly eloquently, described by you, being able to help other individuals see a different side or understand more of the whole picture rather than the fractional points that we're trying to take a stance on is massive. And
Yeah.
that's, I mean, even in couples therapy, it's amazing where you can, use the light aspect. So you have to be able to, click the red light when you're able to speak and your partner cannot speak. You have to be able to sit and listen to that person until they release the light, and then you have the light, and now it's your turn to speak. And when you start to open up that kind of dialogue of, okay, so I have to sit and listen, and then I have to pay attention. Okay, I didn't see it that way. I didn't hear what you said that the first time, but okay, I can hear it now. And when you
Right.
allow people that ability to just listen and give them the space to be able to tell their side, you're going to see a softening stance as the conversation continues to move forward. And
Right.
that's when you can take and acknowledge an emotional side of it and say, thank you for sharing that. I do truly appreciate that. That means the world to me that you were able to really open up and be vulnerable with me about that. So thank you. And that
Yeah.
immediately drops a guard. And once you drop that guard, you have the ability to connect. And once you connect, you can then influence.
It kind of reminds me of the conch from Lord of the Flies when you're when you pass
100%. Yes.
your turn to talk and your turn to
No,
talk.
you can have it.
When
Yeah.
you think about, we had kind of kicked off the conversation talking about how politics has become such a minefield for
Mm-hmm.
emotional. I mean, it feels like it goes sometimes straight from way quick out of social. We try to sit in practical. I feel like practical would be where we could get the most done. And then
Correct.
it so quickly shifts into emotional. What do you think we're getting wrong with this? And I think this is something you and I had dialogued about, trying to think of how to do this without making someone want to click off this episode. We were talking about being able to give each other space in
Mm-hmm.
political discourse, not to talk over each other, not to interrupt each other, not to quicken each other, and just listen to each other. Do you have any thoughts on what you think we as a nation need to do to shift out of the emotional a little bit and get into the practical?
Yeah, it is
Feel
a
free to
tall
be as
task.
candid as you want
Um,
about this because I know what we were originally talking about.
yeah, it's a tall task for sure.
Yeah.
And what I think a lot of it boils down to is this is a spectrum side. This is neither side of the party is doing it correctly or well at the current moment. And accountability and responsibility are the two things that are missing from a lot of the conversations that we're doing. You have the right to be able to say whatever it is that you want to say. That's fine.
Yeah.
But you then have to take the responsibility that those are the words that you said. And
Yes.
that's okay.
100%.
You, and once you take accountability by saying, I have the right to say whatever it is I want to say, you do. No one should ever argue that one way, shape, or form. You have the right to say that. But the other side of that coin, once you say it, it's then your responsibility to own what you said.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone is going to come back and have a different point of view, or they're going to come back and say, I don't see it that way, that's when you can take the responsibility side of, I said it. Okay, now that this is my belief system, there's a difference between believing and knowing. And I think a lot of the political landscape that we get into now does
Yeah.
stem from a belief system and not a knowing system.
I think that's an
And
important thing to note real quick. Belief systems are generally emotion centered, and knowing
yes,
systems are a little bit more practical centered. Yeah.
yes. And once you start blurring those lines with you don't take accountability and responsibility for the things that you said, and then you said something based off of a belief system, not off of, knowing what the actually outcome will be or can be, those are two different scenarios and they get blurred all of the time from a lot of the different conversations that are currently happening. And most people right now will get triggered or response to the emotional side of that conversation. And they don't know if they're chatting about a belief system or they're chatting about something that is they know. And that is broad spectrum statements. Those are across the board. So once you start to be able to understand that I believe that we're going to be going in the right direction is very different than saying these are the facts in front of us and I know we're going in the right direction. There's two different scenarios that are happening when you start to have those types of conversations. And practical can get you into the no, and belief system can get you into the emotional.
So what do you do if you're trying to have I can think of a conversation I had before the last election where it's interesting. I think I was probably in my emotional belief system a little bit. However, the practical knowingness that the other person was portraying to
Mhm.
me seemed so irrational and like so unbased on facts. So what do you do if like maybe you admit, okay, I'm coming to the table a bit emotional because I don't want people to listen and think, uh-oh, emotions are bad.
No,
It's
they're
just
not.
it's just a different state. I mean, when you're in a deep intimate relationship, you want to be in an emotion state with each other because remember
Mhm.
we separated there's the connection phase of emotions, there's the protection phase of emotions. So but when we talk about discourse and political discourse and just being able to move the needle and get anything done at this point, what do you do if you're feeling emotional because the person you're talking to feels they really believe they're practical? They look like they're being practical. They sound like they're being practical. They're pulling facts that they believe are real, but you're just looking at them thinking, oh my gosh, like what planet do you live on? What do you do?
Well, a lot of those aspects of those conversations that do tend to happen. Um,
Yeah.
Again, you have to be able to recognize that what your facts of what you're bringing to the table are going to be different than the facts of what they're bringing to the table, because as much as science is a giant help to humanity, and it's becoming now a divisive nature of, it's been scientifically proven. It has been backed by this study. It has been done by this.
But who
Well,
funds the studies? How big are the
correct.
studies? Is
Like
it
all of
reported
those
on
studies,
self.com? No, I'm just kidding.
like
Is it
exactly.
empirical? Did
The
Chat GPT give you
facts,
the study?
correct. You have to be able to decipher
I
where
love
you're
research,
getting
by
your
the way. I'm
facts
not putting it
from.
down.
No, 100%. Neither am I. I think it is one of the most important things that we do, and it's one of the reasons that humanity is where we are now. It's because of research. It's because of statistics. It's because of studies and because of science. All of those things help us get to where we are now. We wouldn't be here as a society without them. I mean, life expectancy is massively longer than what it used to be. Science has helped us get to the longevity point of being living to 100. Our life expectancy wasn't 100, it was 25, 30, 40 years old, maybe. So there needs to be a balance between the two. And when you're coming to the table to be able to understand, what facts are, your belief system in the facts that you truly believe to be true are coming from a location that has been funded by someone with a biased opinion in some way, shape, or form, and they've tried to shape the narrative or the results in a way that helps their study become known as the focal point or the resource for this particular argument. And which is why blind studies are some of the most productive studies that no matter who you are, you can rely on because they were done with truly an unbiased opinion, stepping in to try to understand the best way that we can with the best knowledge that we have right now to be able to get the best results. And that's why usually blind studies are usually the ones that can create some common ground, because then you don't walk in with your preconceived notion that my facts are better than your facts, because both sides believe that the facts are true, but there's a
Yeah.
biased opinion based on all of them.
I think one of the big things that I wish people listening could take away from the conversation, aside from this new knowledge of, oh, okay, check in with yourself about what state you're in. Am I in social, emotional? I missed one. Practical.
Practical.
What state am I in? What state is the other person in? Is there anything I could do to relate to them on the level that they're at? now in this moment. But I think, if there's anything to like really take from this that I don't think we've used this word yet is leading with curiosity.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes of all time.
Yeah, because
100%.
I have to say, I have a lot of conversations with people I don't agree with. I'm
Yeah.
between interviews, I'm not saying you, but between interviews, between my friend group, I have a very diverse, friend group, family group.
Yeah.
I've lived in different places.
Which is great.
My clients are all across the spectrum, both the spectrum and also, spectrum as far as, the
Sure.
beliefs and all of that. And I think what I have found is that if I lead with curiosity, I don't have to agree with the other person. They could even find out I don't agree with them at some point along the way. And as long as I'm leading with curiosity, our nervous systems are able to remain at a safer state. And we learn so much more from each other in that state.
Correct. Wholeheartedly agree. And one of the greatest scenes that I've ever seen, whether that's cinematically or on TV, is from Ted Lasso. And when he's throwing darts and he's talking to Rupert, and he says the quote by Walt Whitman, "Be curious, not judgmental." And when you do that, and you start with curiosity about why someone may see it that way, what what the facts are, what's driving their emotional side, what's driving their practical or their social side, what's the reasoning behind that, that's your curiosity. That doesn't mean that you need to agree with everything that they're saying. It doesn't
Right.
mean that you need to buy in and believe exactly what they say, but you do have to be curious to be able to understand where that person is coming from. And when you do that, you can start to drop your walls, remove your ego, and remove the idea and concept of being judgmental when you step into any conversation. Because that judgment is really what's going to put up those walls of defense and anger and blame, all coming from the other side, because you're not giving them a chance to communicate in a way that they know how to communicate. You can't teach someone in those moments to communicate differently. The only thing you can do is be curious enough to see the way that they communicate and how they move in between everything that they're talking about. Once you do that, you can disagree and be fine with it. You can shake hands and hug someone before they leave and be in disagreement. That doesn't mean it needs to be vitriol. It just
Right.
means remove your judgment and just start with figuring out where they're coming from. And more often than not, it's people want to be heard.
True, for sure. Well, Greg, I have loved this conversation. And, it's funny, we didn't even hit any of the generational communication and all these things that you talked about in your TED Talk, which I would highly recommend people go check out. Can you remind anyone listening not only where to find you, but what your TED Talk was called so they can search for it and watch it? Because it's out. I'm jealous. Mine's not out yet. I'm like, what's the holdup? So, where can they find you, listen more, learn more, and connect with you?
Yeah. The TEDx that I just delivered a little over a month ago, which was amazing to sit with everybody on stage. It was truly an incredible group of people that have just changed the way that all of us, I feel like I might be able to say that as a common statement between everyone in the group. It just affected the way that we all choose to operate, and it's amazing. My TEDx was on unlocking generational communication, and it is the difference between the way that boomers show up, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, how they choose to show up, the way they see the world, what motivates them, their communication efforts, what they choose as communication, um, and the manner in which they choose to express themselves throughout that communication, whether that's social media, whether that's face to face, whether that's through digital communication. And all of that communication aspects, we do need to figure out how to bridge those gaps between generations, which I think would lead to a lot of ability to calm the waters between a lot of the conversations that most people are having, because boomers see the world very differently than the way that Gen Z does. And if you don't listen and be curious about what that generation has been a part of and
Yeah.
how they see it and what influences them, you're not going to be able to connect and communicate correctly. And for that, you guys can find me on LinkedIn. A bunch of different resources are there. I collaborate with Dr. Catherine Jeffrey, who is a world leader in being able to understand generational strategy and what it means to truly connect and talk to a different generation. She's astounding. She's my mentor. CatherineJeffrey.com is where you can find an immense amount of resources for her too. And both of those places will be able to help people hopefully bridge a lot of the communication gaps that we're having, not just in generations, but in humans.
Right. Oh, well, Catherine, you're welcome to come on the podcast if you want.
she
Feel free to
is
reach
an
out.
astounding human being in what she's been able to accomplish with the Department of Homeland Security and REI Group on Duracell, massive, huge corporations. And she's done it all over the world. And she is truly a leader in helping people understand what leadership is encompassing and what communication is encompassing between generations.
Awesome. Well, and your work too. I mean, I really appreciated your talk was awesome. I got to be in the room, so anyone watching, just know I was sitting to the left, cheering you on. You had lots of great questions from the crowd too, which I don't think people will see in the video, but that was really cool. So, well, Greg, again, thank you for coming. I love that we got to, highlight some of your ideas around this. And I really appreciate how curious you come to the conversation too, where you're willing to hear maybe my different thoughts on the way you saw communication too. And so hopefully we all learned from each other today. And make sure to check Greg out and take a moment to connect with someone else after you click off this episode, everyone. Be well.